So, hello everyone. I think I've managed to start this webinar all right. Welcome to join this consensus policy webinar, which is hosted by EPG Think Tank from Romania and New Energy Coalition from the Netherlands. EPG played an important role in drafting the policy advices for the consensus project, and New Energy Coalition, which I am part of, was coordinating this policy webinar. We are very glad that you join us to speak a bit about the policy developments in the carbon and capture and utility and storage developments in Europe. But before we will actually start, I have to mention two things. One is that this is an automatically recorded webinar. So if you do not wish to be recorded, then of course you can leave and see it on YouTube again. But this is for you to know. You also see a Q&A and a chat function in this Webinar Geek application. We will use the chat function. So we did not activate the Q&A, but if you have in the discussion or a question to one of our panelists, then I would ask you to put it in the chat function. And we can take it from there and try to squeeze it into the discussions we have with our panelists. So thank you for joining. We at ConsenCUS are now a bit over 4 years into this project with very nice technical developments that you see in the picture in this slide. But also based on all the technological developments and the research we have done in this project, we were able to draft some policy advice. And this meeting is mainly meant for us to talk with some specialists about policies, about our findings, but also to catch up with the broader audience in the chat and in this webinar to discuss the future of CCUS related topics. So for this, we have drafted a small agenda. So there's a welcome part. I will quickly introduce some of the panelists after this by asking them just one question, and they can answer, and then also make themselves known to you. Then we will have a short overview of the consensus project that is presented by me, and then a short overview of the policy letter that is presented by Mignea Katuti from EPG Think Tank. And then we want to kick off with our panelists by asking them to just relate to the biggest challenges and the biggest developments they see in the past time in the CCUS field. And then we can kick off with some questions. We have prepared some questions beforehand, but let's see where the discussion will take us at that moment. And of course, we can also use the chat function to have the questions from you, from the audience, to discuss this. Let's kick off with the introduction of our panelists, so to say. First on stage, I want to ask Edward Pernot from the Zero Emission Platform. The Zero Emission Platform is the official advisor to the European Union on industrial carbon management. And the mission of ZEP platform is to accelerate the deployment of industrial carbon management across Europe. So my first question to Edward was, well, we had an industrial carbon management strategy adopted. So I think you had quite a slow year for you.
Yeah, pretty slow. Not much happening in this space at all. We may as well just close the webinar, I suppose, and given there's nothing really happening now, thank you very much for inviting me this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here and to support the ConsenCUS project. It's been quite busy, certainly in the last year or so. We actually had a European election as well as a new commission formed last year. So since the strategy was published in early 2024, we've seen a change in the new dynamics at the European level. But certainly under the framework of the Clean Industrial Deal, I think we should hopefully see a lot of progress for CCUS or for carbon management over the next coming years.
Thank you. We will learn a lot from you later on in the webinar. Second, I want to introduce to you is Tom Mikunda. He is from Bologna, Europe. Tom is a senior policy advisor for carbon capture and storage at Bologna. And the mission of Bologna is fighting for a science-based solution for climate pollution and ecosystems. It is an internationally foundation, but based in Norway, headquartered in Norway. And my first kick-off question to Tom was, because Bologna is a science-based organization, what is the biggest scientific misconception about CCUS you have to debunk every time?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Derek, and hello everyone. I think there are many, but I think from a Bologna perspective, the one that we perhaps spend the most focus on is really trying to get around that polarization of CCS being like a complete other solution to climate change than, for example, renewable energy and green hydrogen. And actually, we spend most of our time saying, we're going to need all these technologies, and CCS should only be put where it makes sense and used where it makes sense. And it's totally not a replacement, for example, for renewable energies. And there are specific applications which we have identified where you need to do CCS.
Yes, thank you, Tom. And also, we will learn a lot more about the works of Bologna and the challenges ahead in this webinar. Third, I want to invite to answer a short question from my side is Meindert van der Spek. He's an associate professor for the School of Engineering and Physical Science and the Institute of Mechanical Process and Energy Engineering at Heriot-Watt University, Edinburgh. You also work for the Carbon Research Center, so a lot of your work is focused on work on carbon management. And my question is, will there be enough market-ready techniques you are developing in time to get the challenges of carbon mitigation done?
Well, the answer is that depends. So, we have all the technologies needed right now at commercial scale that, to develop a CCS project, right? So the capture technologies are there at commercial scale, the transport technologies are there, and the CO2 storage technologies are there. So projects are being developed, are being built. If we have diverse enough a portfolio of technologies, and if whether we're building with the speed that we should be building to really let CCUS contribute to net zero by 2050, then the answer is an outright no, because if we want to achieve that target, we should have much more capacity constructed, and we should see much more investment in R&D and upscale already now, right? So no, we're lagging behind, but the technologies are there. We can do this.
Okay, thank you, Meindert. I think also a lot for discussion later on. Last I want to introduce is Mihnea Katuti from our partner Energy Policy Group think tank of Romania. You will present briefly our policy letter later on, but my question to you is, can industries avoid talking about CCUS at the moment?
It's a pretty straightforward answer. I would say no. Thanks a lot, Dirk. Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining in. I would say that in some sectors in particular, like lime cement, avoiding the conversation is completely unrealistic. But similar to what Tom was already saying a bit earlier, there are ways to prioritize. And we need to make sure that we target CCS applications in those industries where it's truly essential. I think that the added layer of the discussions that we're now having on the 2040 targets also put CCS in a pretty good position for carbon removals, especially for bioenergy capture and storage, for DACs, for direct air capture. So I would say that, yes, it is unavoidable, but what matters most is that we speak about it honestly, be very clear about where it's indispensable, what are the main trade-offs associated with different applications, and then how do we ensure that projects deliver real emissions. Of course, it's not a silver bullet in every sector, but it's definitely a complement to direct emission reductions.
So thank you, Mirneja. I will quickly switch on to the next slide and introduce a bit about our ConsenCUS project. I said that we are a bit over 4 years now in the project. We had to extend the project with 6 more months because, what you know about technology innovation, sometimes it doesn't go as planned and you need a bit more extra time. But in this a bit more than 4 years of the project, we try to live up to our acronym, I think, very nice found acronym of ConsenCUS, by creating carbon neutral industry clusters. This was a modeling part through electricity-based innovations in capture, utilization, and storage. And this was the real challenge of our project, that we really delivered some exciting innovations in electricity-based capture and utilization. Next to this demonstrating of innovations, we also designed the net zero industrial clusters. And we did research also on communities and their attitude towards carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So a lot of this information is found on our website, but today we will focus mainly on the project on the innovation technologies and what it means for policies. The project consists of 19 partners across 7 countries. Here you see all the logos of the partners. I will not go into detail, but there are a nice mix of industries and scientific partners, as well as institutions that want to help progress the CCUS. This is our action map, so to say. We based our net zero industry clusters around the northwest of Europe, Netherlands, Denmark, and Britain, but also in the southeast of Europe, in Romania, Greece, Bulgaria, where also our 3 demonstration locations are located. So this was the very special focus of our net zero based clusters, with a real industry testing our innovations. Why these industries and the focus on these industries? Well, they are all hard to abate industries with a lot of emissions, that even if you use all green resources like renewable energy, they still have process emissions, but they are crucial to the industries for the European economy. So, and of course they were selected because they were willing to invest in the pilot and the demonstration we had in mind. So they stick their head above the field and said, yes, we want to test your demonstration units. So we're very glad that we could test them at these industries. And of course we have some footage for this, and hopefully now the technique will allow me to show you a short video of what we have reached in the past 4 years. So I need to...
4 years ago, we set out on a mission to tackle one of the toughest climate policy challenges of our time: to build a carbon capture and utilization plant to contribute to net zero industry emissions in 2050. Hard-to-abate industries produce unavoidable CO2 emissions, Through our innovation, we can capture these emissions, utilize them, and change them into useful chemicals. With 19 partners from 7 countries, ConsenCUS unites industry and science in a net zero vision. Our goal? To capture and convert CO2 using groundbreaking electrochemical technology never before applied at this scale. It all began with the discovery of 2 different innovations by Wetsus and Kovar, then scaled up to a demonstration unit operated and monitored by DTU. We took this unit across Europe. First stop, Aalborg Portland cement plant in Denmark. Then, OMV Petrum's oil refinery in Romania. And finally, the Yerakini mine in Greece, operated by Grecian magnesite. We tested, we improved, we learned. Each run a step closer to net zero. Together, we proved it can be done. And we looked beyond technology. We researched net zero carbon clusters to explore how industrial transformation can benefit people and planet alike. And now you can explore the results. Visit our website, consensus.eu.
So thank you for listening into the video. I will now switch on the presentation once more. So something that we're really proud of reaching, taking this demonstration unit across 3 countries, across the half of the continent of Europe, and to test it, and getting us a lot of detailed information on how it works, but also on the policies. And therefore I want to invite Mignea to talk a bit about what we've learned through this project and what we formulated as policy advices in this project.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Dirk. Thanks for the introduction of the project and for walking us through some of the basics of what we're trying to do. I think that it's important from very applied projects like this one to try to understand what are the main policy conclusions that can be drawn, because it's one thing that policymakers and policy practitioners engage in debate amongst themselves, but I think it's important to also see what's actually happening on the ground. What are some of the barriers that sometimes you can only really understand once you start developing an actual project, and then understand how this can be reflected in the policy, regulatory, financing framework that we have in place both at EU and national levels. I will try to be relatively brief. What I want to do is just to do a very quick stock take about where we are on industrial carbon management, and then try to go a bit through 5 main recommendations that I think after all these years in this project, we can safely say reflect barriers that we've seen throughout the implementation of ConsenCUS, and are things that will need to be addressed, some of them not just for CCS, but I think for broader net zero and clean technologies as well. I think it's important in the beginning to just sort of admit, similar to what Edward was saying a bit earlier, that industrial carbon management, and in particular CCS and CCU, are advancing quite rapidly in Europe, especially on the policy front, but also in very concrete projects. Now we have everything from the Net Zero Industry Act, which sets storage obligations on oil and gas producers. We have an industrial carbon management strategy, which really puts CCS and CCU at the core of Europe's efforts to reach climate neutrality. And more recently, everything associated to the Clean Industrial Link, this industrial deal, which connects competitiveness and decarbonization, and opens a lot of space for new things that will enable ICM solutions, including things like low carbon labels for cement, for low emissions products, and so It's quite encouraging to see that on the ground things are happening as well, perhaps not at the desired pace, but some impressive announcements have been made already. And projects are multiplying, ranging all the way from Netherlands and Norway to Greece and Croatia. And something that's very important, and including when speaking about EU financial instruments like the Innovation Fund, the geographical scope is broadening. So now we no longer have projects just in the North and Baltic Seas, but also in Southern and Eastern Europe. And there are a lot of emerging cross-border initiatives facilitated through things like the Connecting Europe facility. Now, trying to focus a bit on some of the recommendations that we try to put together from the work that's been done of the ConsenCUS project. You'll see some of them are a bit broad, but again, they are derived from very concrete real-world experience, but happy to follow up with any questions that you may have afterwards. So to kick things off, the first recommendation that we formulated is that the EU needs to adopt a balanced approach between the deployment of mature technologies and innovation of next generation technologies. So more concretely, we need to simultaneously roll out existing technologies like the amine-based capture technologies, which in some cases are already commercially available and can help us reach near-term storage targets. But at the same time, we also need to develop new solutions like that developed through this project that we're speaking about, which develops an electrochemical capture process, which is powered by electricity rather than heat. This comes with some advantages. For example, it avoids the use of volatile solvents. It delivers high purity CO2 streams. It's technically quite scalable, but it is more energy intensive than conventional methods. So it's important to try to understand what are the different trade-offs between different types of technologies, but also offer enough space for both R&D and innovation, but also deployment. I would say that there are some encouraging aspects we've seen here in the recent announcements on the multi-annual financial framework, and especially the Commission's proposal for the sizing of the new Horizon envelope. But also on the deployment side for things like the Industrial Decarbonization Bank, which will be mainly funded for the EU ETS, which focuses a bit more directly on deployment. Of course, the trick lies on how do you differentiate between what's done for things like the Competitiveness Fund, what's mobilized for the Industrial Decarbonization Bank. But I think the need to focus on both exists there. It's just about how do we do the programming in a way in which we stimulate all the things that I've mentioned a bit earlier. The second recommendation is about proper funding demonstration. And I think the experience from this project shows that industrial demonstration often comes at a magnitude more expensive than basic R&D. And some of the learnings that we've had in this project is that demonstrators need ample runtime to generate reliable data that you can use to draw more concrete conclusions. There's a lot of learning by doing, and smarter people than those at EPG have needed more than once to engineer out unforeseen problems that have arisen throughout the project. And that it's important to avoid over-optimism because breakthroughs in the lab often face setbacks when you put them in operational environments. So you need some type of flexibility in the instruments that you provide. The third recommendation, which I think reflects the ails of broader EU industrial ambitions, is that you need to mitigate for the high energy costs. I think this is particularly acute for solutions related to carbon capture and storage, and that's because the applications of such technologies will always come at a higher operational cost than when you don't do it. And a lot of that comes from the energy penalty that's incurred. So somehow these need to be supported going forward. It's a matter also of competitiveness at a time when industrial operators in the EU face bills in electricity that are 2 to 3 times higher than those in the US, and up to 5 times higher when it comes to gas. And since carbon capture and storage is very energy intensive, some forms of operational support are needed. These have been partly enabled through things like the Clean Industry State Aid Framework. But of course, if that's left mainly within the remit of national governments, this runs the risks of disruptions to single market and creating certain imbalances that may be more difficult to address in the longer term. The fourth recommendation for policymakers is that we must acknowledge trade-offs in technology performance. I was already mentioning a bit about this, that technologies like electrochemical capture have distinct advantages like high purity CO2 streams. They avoid harmful solvents, but they do come with a higher energy use. On the other side, amine-based solutions, of course, they're a bit more commercially ready, but sometimes they can have a higher environmental footprint. The energy use is also reflected in the capture rates that are feasible from an economic standpoint. So I think it's just important to acknowledge that there's no single technology that excels on every metric. And instead of picking winners prematurely, I think any way forward should probably involve a portfolio approach where diverse technologies are promoted based on the different level of readiness at which they currently are. And finally, recommendation 5, a bit in line with the times, I would say, it's cut the red tape and boost capacity. And here there's some concrete findings that we've seen throughout the work done in ConsenCUS, which is that the current funding frameworks can sometimes discourage participation of industry. That's because there's rules such as for-profit companies receiving lower funding rates, which can make participation unattractive, particularly for SMEs and startups. There can be a general, I can call it aversion to subcontracting in projects like this, which of course complicates then the hiring of engineers that are needed to operate and work on such pilots. And the administrative requirements are very heavy and they can slow down projects. It's equally important to mention that there are also bottlenecks in human capital. And demonstrating and scaling ICM technologies doesn't require just money, but also engineers, regulators, project managers, ideally with real-world experience in such projects. And I think there's still a long way to go on this front. I think that pretty much sums up the 5 recommendations that we've pieced together. I think what's important to conclude with is that industrial carbon management is not just about technology, it's also about policies and governance structures, which I think is why some of the panelists that we have on today are some of the best minds that we have on how we can solve that puzzle. But I think it's important to issue a warning, which is that without all these very careful balancing acts that Europe needs to do between deployment, funding demonstrators, tackling energy costs, and accounting for all the trade-offs that I've mentioned a bit earlier, we risk not only not meeting our climate neutrality goals and our shorter-term targets, but also really struggling in the industrial competitiveness race in which we've engaged. I think going forward, it'll be important to continue drawing conclusions from projects such as this one. And these are essential in ensuring that the EU creates the right policy environment that really allows ICM solutions to scale. I think that's enough for me at this stage. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Mignea, for elaborating on our policy letter. Of course, this can be found on the website of ConsenCUS to also read a bit more about the details and the reasons for putting this on the agenda and putting this in the policy letter. What I wanted to ask is now for Edbard to give also a sort of reflection on this policy letter, but also talk a bit about your own work challenges and solutions on the CCS part.
Yes, thank you very much for an excellent presentation, also for the really good overview of the letter. I mean, I think the first thing is basically where we stand now versus, I suppose, the first time that Europe really tried to accelerate carbon capture and storage. So back in 2006 and 2007, the EU developed also a strategy. They identified the clear problems in the sense that we have great potential for developing storage sites, at least geologically, but that it really lacked a business case and sort of a reason why one would do that, as well as a reason why sort of one would want to capture and store their emissions. Now, the thinking back then was that the emissions trading system would be the backbone of the business case, essentially. That the price of or the cost, let's say, of doing carbon capture and storage would be less than what the price of emitting a ton of CO2 would be. And that didn't really work out. I think at the time a lot of the focus was on the power sector, which is a very difficult application to work on. Probably more difficult, one would say, than in terms of the volatility of the market than some of the industrial sectors, as well as the fact that we had other alternatives at the time, and there was certainly a lot of public subsidies that were funded, and as they should have been, funding renewable energy technologies. And so what we saw then ultimately was no projects reaching financial close and entering operation. I think this time around, I would like to think it's different. The focus is very much on, well, firstly, I think we went through a phase in Europe where we sort of debated whether we needed the technology at all. And then almost overnight, once we decided, I would say probably around 2020, 2021, that absolutely we needed it. Then the question was, how quickly could we scale it up to a level that is almost, how much is being captured and stored globally, which is around about 50 to 60 million tons. And that's where the Net Zero Industry Act sits today. And I think, to me, there's probably two things that really stand out as problems that need to be solved when it comes to getting projects really to at commercial scale to get over the line. And of course, these two probably stand out more than others, and there's many different challenges there. But I suppose the first one really is in terms of the role of the emitter. And so under the system that we have right now, all of the funding, all of the rationale, the reasoning why any project will get off the ground is really for an emitter to decide, we're going to build a capture plant, and we're going to also link up with its infrastructure and pay the tariffs. So for someone to take my captured CO2 away and to dispose of it. And for that, we will pay a price. And the whole justification for doing that is based on the ETS price, is on the carbon price. And so you do see some public funding schemes that are there to support emitters in the sense of hedging against the carbon price. So if the ETS price is trading at 100 euros a ton and your carbon capture and storage project costs 101 euros a ton, the thinking is at least then that the emitter will be more likely or less likely to do the project, because basically they're losing money on it. On the flip side, if it costs you 100 euros a ton and your subsidy is covering you up to 101 euros a ton, then maybe you'll be insulated from the cost somewhat. But the real problem is cash flow. And that's basically, in essence, how much money is coming into the project and what's going out of it. And when you're building a capture plant, it's very expensive. And when you're operating it, it's also expensive, and it costs you more energy, and it costs you more tariffs that you have to pay to take away the CO2. And then on the flip side of it, how much extra money are you getting for taking on all this risk? And at the moment, what we see is really there's only two options. The first is you're selling carbon removals. So if you have a biogenic feedstock there that you're capturing CO2 from, you can sell a removal onto a voluntary market. And on the other side is if you're selling an industrial product, so you're selling your cement or your fertilizer, you're hoping that someone will pay a premium to buy that. Again, that's also voluntary. So that's very difficult for a bank to finance if you're basically financing it on the back of, I guess, goodwill, some might say, from participants. And so I think that's really what's holding up a lot of projects at the moment, is really, I wouldn't say a lack of demand, but really a lack of a clear reasoning why companies would press ahead with a project that is relatively high risk and the returns are not particularly high. And then the other thing I think we're going to discuss a little bit later is on the storage side. So for projects that are located somewhere around the North Sea, that seems great because there's a lot of projects moving ahead there. But if you're outside of Northwestern Europe, there's very few projects that seem to be readily available within the coming years. Now, it's not for a problem of geology, but I think the reasoning as well is that we need to better incentivize companies to do exploration work and to try and build onshore storage, which will make things a lot cheaper as well. It's a lot less complex. It's a different skill set. It's a lot easier to do exploration work, and it's a lot cheaper overall to build a storage site onshore. And so, at least my hope, at least, is that we will have much more distribution of storage over the coming years. And I think for that, the Net Zero Industry Act should hopefully help quite a lot. And so, at least from the ZEP side, I mean, where we're working right now is really to try and help those governments, especially those that are relatively new to the topic, to kind of get up to speed, and maybe the problems that countries like the Netherlands or Denmark might have taken 5-10 years to solve before can hopefully be done in 2 or maybe 1 year in terms of the learnings, and then also trying to devise better policies that can really kind of kick off, I think, a lot more of the projects there. And I think for that, there's going to be a lot of work coming up in the next coming year or so at the EU level. And so I do think that there's definitely a bridge that needs to be built to sort of scale over that gap. But I would be relatively optimistic that we can try and do this in the next 2 to 3 years.
Thank you, Edvard, for your observations on the work and the main points. I saw in the chat a question about where is the policy letter. I tried to answer it, that I could not share it because I'm hosting the webinar, but luckily Mignea already shared the letter. Thank you for your question, Antonio. So now I want to go to Tom to also give a short overview, and you will be presenting some slides. So I will stop sharing my screen, and then the floor is yours, Tom. Hopefully.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Let's see. The slides, just a bit of a backdrop to where we're busy with at Bologna, and maybe then reflect on the policy messages. I mean, first things first, Bologna is we're about industrial decarbonisation, looking for the working out the levers to enable industrial decarbonisation. CCS and the required infrastructure is one of those. But there's also other aspects around removals and accounting to ensure that, for example, technologies like carbon dioxide removals and carbon capture and utilisation, that they result in clear and tangible climate benefits, something that we focus on a lot, feeding into EU discussions in that regard. We also look obviously much broader around the role of low carbon hydrogen and renewables, and incorporating as much renewable energy to decarbonise industrial production as possible. And then we look at the levers to, a lot of our work actually is focused around EU policies that really focus on how to develop the markets for these technologies, be that, for example, policy and subsidy schemes, be that low carbon products, or standards or what have you. So it's really about creating sort of this environment, not so much sort of from a technology advancement focus, which is a lot about what ConsenCUS is about, but really about how to enable that upscaling and investment and financing of these technologies. That's a lot of what Bologna does. I think that this is pretty much a slide that I want to point out, and just our funders, just to these are where we have our funders as an NGO. So I think I can leave it at that for now, and maybe just continue to sort of reflect on a few of the things we've heard from your policy paper. And I think it it all makes sense, and I think to also to reflect on what Avard said is we're really getting to now to the business end of developing CCS. If we look across Europe, we've got projects, large scale projects under development. We've got Northern Lights in operation, which is a full chain multimodal CCS project, which has commenced injection just a few weeks ago successfully. We've got the Portos project in the Rotterdam Harbour, which has got 4 emitters all joined up to a single pipeline to take that CO2 and inject in depleted gas fields. So that's due to commence in 2026. And then, of course, we can see a huge amount of interest in developing these CCS value chains. And I think that's a really important point, is what a lot of the policy attention is now focused on, is around how to manage these CCS value chains and what are the sort of rules of engagement between different actors in the chain, who's going to fulfill what role, who delivers or who has to bear what risks. And I think that's really interesting. So we're going from sort of a lot of the sort of conceptual projects that we've spent the last decade or so trying to work out, we're now actually seeing coming into reality. And I think this is what makes this a really interesting space to be working on right now.
Thank you, Tom. Let me put back on the slide I was using, and then ask last in line, Meindert also give a reflection on more the technology side and the research side, I think, of the CCUS developments of the latest years and hopefully future years.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Maybe a brief introduction of the work that we do at the Research Center for Carbon Solutions at Heriot-Watt University. So we are a very an interdisciplinary research center that cover the whole CCU and S, also transport value chain, including some engineered carbon dioxide removals. So our work is spans the technology readiness level scale from basically 1 where concept development and material development in laboratories to, let's say, 5 or perhaps sometimes we do a little bit of 6 with collaborators, like in this project. And we don't only look at technology development, but we also do a lot of technology evaluation and analysis, and especially with a focus on policy and decision making. So providing the answers to policy and decision makers that they kind of need, or the data that they need to make sound and well underpinned decisions. Yeah, I mean, with respect to a little bit my views on CCUS technology R&D, right? So I think what we have seen a lot, and that's been really quite good, is we've seen a lot of investment from the European Union, but also from national governments into, let's say, the earlier stages of research and development. So earlier stages, for instance, from concept identification to making materials for CO2 capture or for CO2 conversion. Making small, benchtop prototypes and maybe a larger benchtop prototype. And the funny thing is that, there's reasons why that is, I think, traditionally well funded, because the investments aren't so very large. And there's also this very popular belief that is as popular as it is incorrect, that of disruptive technologies, right? That will come from a laboratory, and that breakthroughs will come from a laboratory, and will cause a revolution in a technology or how it works. So that's in all but very few cases untrue. So the reality is really that people can develop the most interesting technologies in the laboratory, and very often they do show some promise. But when scaling up these technologies to a level where they need to perform commercially, the reality is that you start identifying many problems and many reasons why a technology does not operate as well as it did in the lab. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's a problem that cannot be overcome, but we need a lot of additional engineering and tech development to kind of engineer out these difficulties. And what you then very often find is that something that looks very, very promising in the laboratory compared to what is the incumbent technology or kind of the state of the art, then is only just as good or maybe marginally better, but definitely not a game changer or something like that. And that brings me to my following point. So it is therefore it's absolutely critical that we also invest easily as much, but probably much more into the demonstration phase of technologies, because only there do we learn how technologies start performing in a real environment at a scale that is closer to commercial, not yet commercial, but closer to commercial. And how all these upscaling issues that will be there inevitably, how they look, and then as a next step, how they can be mitigated or engineered out. So this is much more costly, because building a pilot plant or building a demonstration plant costs a lot more money than doing research in a laboratory, right? So I mean that means that if we're serious about having a technology portfolio for the complete European industry that serves all the industry's needs, and not, for instance, only the needs of bigger cement plants or bigger steel plants or whatever, that we need to invest a lot more as an EU, but also as EEA member countries or the United Kingdom, where I'm currently based, than what we're currently doing. And the story, but that's more difficult to sell to a constituency, right, or to an electorate, because we're already spending billions on R&D as the EU. That's not a bad thing; that's a good thing. But basically, we're saying you need to spend billions plus another so many billions if you're really serious about having the technologies that are ready on time that you need for carbon management, right? And then there's probably, and that's something that I think Edward already alluded to, then there's another kind of, I'm not sure if it's an elephant in the room, but the ETS will not get CO2 capture plants and CO2 transport projects and storage projects built. And the reason for that is that all these things are very capital intensive. And especially the first projects will incur very high costs. And how things work is that we need these first projects, because only when we design and build these, we can identify where we can improve. So that's another maybe myth debunked, that we can solve all the problems just by lab research. That's not true, right? So we need to build large scale projects because they help us bring the cost down of the technology. But the problem is that these first projects are going to be more expensive than what we would like them to be, and than what the ETS is. So there's a chicken and an egg there in a sense. So also these, for sound, incremental, continuous R&D and technology improvement of commercial scale technologies, we need to deploy them, and these deployments will need subsidies, because the risk is simply too large for commercial operators in industries to take on by themselves. That's not a nice message either, is it? It's a very difficult message, but it's the reality.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Meinert, for your input on these. I hear a lot of nice progress in a subject that was obsolete for almost a decade, but then once we've picked it up in 2020, like Edward said, we went sky high with expectations, but we still need to do a lot. Like Tom said, the whole value chain, you only now see the roles, the rules, the obligations, the bottlenecks emerging if you want to deploy this at a full-scale value chain. And Meinert, like you said, the technology is maybe there, but you need to invest heavily, and that may cost more than you want in the initial phase. Maybe I want to use this. Yeah.
Maybe adding one thing, we have done the exact same thing for renewable energy, right? So we've put billions and billions of subsidies into wind and solar, and I think that's been a very good thing, because that drove the cost down. And we need to do the same thing for other technologies that we need for the energy transition and for reaching net zero. And CCUS is definitely one of them.
Yep. Yes. So we have thought of a bit of sort of discussion starters based on the policy letter. Maybe Mignea, you can introduce this first discussion topic a bit. Of course, it's based on our consensus findings of trying to build a net zero technology. But then we can head off with a discussion on this.
Yeah, fantastic. Then it's always difficult because I don't want to preempt answers, but I think even though it might sound a bit basic based on where we are with carbon capture discussions nowadays, it's still important to reflect about how do we ensure that now that we have regulations in place, very concrete and tangible targets that are applicable already, is how do we make sure that we meet those targets with projects that truly deliver emissions reductions necessary for reaching climate neutrality. There's always the issue of prioritization, which I think was already mentioned with the introduction, but it might be a bit good to delve into a bit more and trying to understand where in the policy and financing space we can make that prioritization, but also trying to understand what are the best ways in which we can go beyond your usual MRV metrics for monitoring and ensuring transparency of these projects, because the truth is that there is still a trust issue in some parts, both of the policymaking space, but also in the broader public about these projects actually delivering concrete emissions reductions.
So maybe something to reflect for Tom or Edward on this challenge. Can we pick our favorite technology, or are we not in that place yet?
Yeah, maybe just to kick off, I think obviously the development of CCS and the completion or the implementation of the Net Zero Industry Act, they're very much intertwined, of course, in the sense that CCS projects can only be developed with CO2 storage. So I think how that plays out is going to be interesting, and how going back to the ground rules about at the same time we've got a potential regulatory package coming out next year, which maybe gives some additional direction into which entities will step in to fulfill the role of transport operators, what kinds of business cases are going to emerge. But crucially, I think both emitters and storage providers have to find each other, and naturally, and have to both are needed to actually get these value chains up and running. Now, the interesting thing about the Net Zero Industry Act is that oil and gas operators have clear obligations to go out and develop these storage sites, and there are no real clear contingencies about CCS projects emerging, really, right? So it's not like there are some derogations built in about supply and demand, but they shouldn't really be given as an excuse for obligated entities not to fulfill the requirements of the Net Zero Industry Act. I think we're seeing actually a growth in demand for CO2 transport and storage infrastructure from various different industries, and I think that gives a clear signal that there is going to be demand coming up to 2030, and there is already sufficient demand for this 50 million tons of annual injection capacity that needs to be developed. So, yeah, in my view, I think it's quite clear what needs to happen. There needs to be a pool of available permitted storage being developed in the EU, which then gives investors in industry to go out and invest in CO2 capture. And in that way, it will benefit the obligated entities because they have a greater chance of being able to develop their projects in a profitable way.
Yeah, thank you. How do you view this, Edward?
I think first we need to kind of zoom out a bit in terms of both the Net Zero Industry Act set within sort of the realm of how it came about, and then also kind of why the focus on CO2 storage. So the first thing is actually on CO2 storage. There's already too much CO2 in the atmosphere, right? So climate change is already causing massive amounts of destruction around the world through the changing of the climate that's been caused by too much CO2 that's in the atmosphere. Continuing to add more CO2 to the atmosphere through the production of fossil fuels that are unabated. And we will continue to do that for the foreseeable future, right? So the hope is that at least we reach net zero around 2050. Every ton of CO2 that we add to the atmosphere makes things worse, right? So we know that, at least scientifically, there's the cumulative effect of CO2 in the atmosphere. And there's really only 3.5 places that you can put CO2. So the first one is the geosphere, where ultimately it comes from. This hydrocarbons have been storing CO2 permanently, or let's say for millennia, right? And we took that out as fossil energy. We burned it for the energy content, and then we put the CO2 in the atmosphere. The second place is the biosphere, right? So plants, trees, vegetation. They store CO2 temporarily, right? So every plant or tree will grow through the process of photosynthesis, will take in CO2, and then ultimately it dies off and the CO2 is re-emitted. And then there's the atmosphere, and we know the problems of putting CO2 in the atmosphere. And of course, there's also the oceans, but that's even more complicated, right? So we know that putting CO2 back in the ground is essential to stabilize and mitigate the effects of climate change for the future. And we hope at least that the world will continue beyond 2050. So we know we need to put more CO2 back in the ground, right? So I think that's really important, because the Net Zero Industry Act started very much as an answer to the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, right? Which was put in by the Biden administration to finally have the American government, do something about clean energy. They put a lot of subsidies on the table. And the idea was that we were going to go with industrial policy and put our technologies, and we determined, okay, these are the key tools available to reduce our emissions. We're going to support them financially. And Europe's answer to that was essentially, okay, we're going to do the NZIA, or the Net Zero Industry Act. We don't necessarily have the funding that the Americans do, but we're going to try and put certain measures on the table. I don't refer to carbon capture and storage as a single technology, because as we know that, and Mihina described, there's various different types of capture technologies available. And I think putting CO2 back in the ground is essential, and it's as important as developing other forms of non-emitting forms of clean energy, purely for the environmental benefits that it has. So I think, like with the NZIA, what it does at least is it prioritizes or makes clear that a priority of developing storage capacity, which we don't have at the moment, and we need to develop that in Europe. And like I said, the resources are there. It would be crazy for industries in Spain or in the Czech Republic or in Romania, for example, to be reliant on storage sites in Norway. I don't think it's going to happen in the sense of shipping CO2 those distances. And so the only way those industries will also survive economically, and the jobs that they have, is by scaling up domestic storage, ideally onshore in those regions. And that's really something that governments and industry need to step up with. And I think the Net Zero Industry Act is at least the first step in that direction.
Yes. Thank you. There's also a question in the chat, but it's a rather elaborated or technical one, and I am not sure if you are already able to answer this question. It's about the taxonomy of capturing from a co-generated power and energy output of the co-generation is then the 100 grams of CO2 electric met with this regulation. I'm not sure if you all, this is very detailed question. Maybe we can take this back and try to find an answer for Nikolai, because maybe that's a bit too detailed for now.
Yeah, I'm very happy to follow up via email with that.
Thank you.
Definitely on clarification.
Yeah. Okay, then I also want to switch to a second question we had to our panel, and you already mentioned it a bit, Edward, in your previous answer. So how can we have a balanced deployment across regions? So now a lot of focus is on Norway, on the Dutch projects in the North Sea, Northwest Europe. United Kingdom has a large project pipeline, I think, in development for CCUS and storage. But how
we're building? We're building, and we have a pipeline.
Yeah, you're building the pipeline. But how can we accelerate this infrastructure development in Central and Eastern Europe? Maybe, Mignea, you can also start with your observations now from your Romanian work, of course, and then maybe I can ask Edward also to kick off that one.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. I think that to some extent this is getting better, and I did mention this a bit earlier that it was a point at which we were speaking of primarily projects in Northwest Europe that were developing. I think that's not necessarily the case anymore. We're seeing projects in Central and Eastern Europe that are part of the Connecting Europe facility as well, and the PCI list, and the projects of common interest. But we still do not see the same type of ecosystem that's visible in some parts of Europe. And something that I fear is that even though the Net Zero Industry Act obligations place the storage mandates on oil and gas operators based on their historic production quantities, which do mean that some CE countries now have storage targets, because of the pace at which they have to do this, by judging at the timelines that it took countries like Norway to develop the infrastructure required for a fully functioning multi-emitter project, I am afraid that the instinct will be to move and basically buy in projects in Northwest Europe by those oil and gas operators from Southeast Europe. So I'm just afraid here that there's some split incentives, and there's some things that it's always a difficult line to draw between what's the responsibility, of course, of member states. You cannot force them into this, but it can be some EU level actions on this. And I think there's also an issue here of based on the timelines that we know we have for the CO2 storage targets, and on the fiscal constraints that are visible and exist. How do we make sure that the region can mobilize sufficient public finance for such projects? And I think it's always an important thing to discuss. I think it also relates a bit to what Tom was saying a bit earlier about where we are in the CCS discussion right now, where basically we're seeing negotiations between different parts of the value chain about who needs to do what, who pays for what, how do we set tariffs, and so on. And I think in Eastern Europe, we're not seeing that conversations moving forward at the pace at which this is required. So unless there's ways to bring everyone together in common projects, for example, like for the IPCEI frameworks, things will stall. Then the barrier with IPCEI projects is that these are primarily funded by state aid, which brings me back again to my point earlier on fiscal constraints. So then is how do you enable MFF money or common European resources to be channeled through these types of projects and enable infrastructure build out in Central and Eastern Europe that will not develop if we rely primarily on national needs. So that's a very convoluted way of saying that things have improved, but things are not happening at the pace and scale that we needed. We need some EU money and intervention in this projects, but then also the responsibility primarily lies with member states.
How's the appetite, locally? I mean, in a country like Romania, for instance, and maybe you also are aware how the appetite for CCUS is in your neighboring countries.
I think the appetite is generally strong, especially for entities that will need to reduce emissions in line with the ETS calendar. I think there's a lot of energy from some energy-intensive industries to have solutions ready. The two largest oil and gas producers in Romania have a combined CO2 storage target of more than 10 million tons by 2030. That's already more than the cement and lime industry that we have at national level. So you already need to start thinking about imports. But I think the challenge is not at company level, where there are things that still need to be sorted out between these different parts of the value chain, but at policy making level, where we're seeing these small incremental changes in the right direction into making all the regulatory aspects fall in place, but there's no political will to discuss these openly. Yeah, it's still a bit of a taboo project in some areas, but again, this varies. I think something that was happening a couple of weeks ago in Latvia, for example, was that they've had a historic moratorium on any CCS projects there, which has been lifted. So there are big policy changes that we're seeing, but there's some geographies where this is happening much slower, and definitely not in time for the 2030 targets.
Yeah. So also in the chat, a question: what if there are no feasible storage sites available in certain countries, and is utilization then a good alternative? Maybe Edward, can you?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So if you're from Finland or Estonia, sure, I can tell you that your geological potential for CO2 storage is definitely not great. So you've got a good excuse. If you're from pretty much any other country in the continent of Europe, you have very little excuses to at least not try to do exploration work. So yeah, I mean, I think the question as well of either or is a bit is a false comparison. I mean, obviously, you start with a capture process, which in theory can be done anywhere, as long as you've got a source of emissions, right? You've got a flue gas to separate your CO2 from, or pure stream CO2. And then really it's a question of what are you going to do with it? So if you have a use for CO2, that's great. Normally it involves a lot of energy that goes in with binding something else. So you're making a material, or you're making a fuel, or you're combining it with a hydrogen molecule. All of those things cost a lot of energy, and Europe is not entirely blessed with tons of cheap, clean energy. So, and if you manage to make a product, chances are, in a lot of cases, you're going to find a product that already exists that's cheaper, or is a different alternative. And if you manage to find a buyer, that's also great. Unfortunately, much like with the hydrogen debate in Europe, things got very giddy with CCU. Certainly in the late 2010s, there was a lot of energy and a lot of noise made about it. I haven't seen a lot of projects get to FID. There are some that are getting close, but again, the problem is always offtake. With CCS, it's a little different because your offtake is basically someone who will take that CO2, put it in the ground, but you're paying them to do that. They're not paying you to take the CO2 from you. So the product is in essence going in the other way, which is my cement that I'm producing or my fertilizer that I'm producing. That's now much reduced in terms of its carbon content. And that's where we need to find a market, because markets for cement already exist. Markets for fertilizer already exist. Markets for low carbon cement and low carbon fertilizer don't fully exist yet, certainly not ones that are net zero. So I think our energy should really be, and by energy I mean our manpower, our human power really should be focused on trying to develop markets for low carbon cement, because we know that we're going to need these type of materials in the future. And in the case of CCU, there will be valuable applications there, certainly. But I think that they will be limited in scope and in size. And I think trying to say that we won't be able to do storage in all over Europe is not entirely true until we actually try to do that. So I would say it's a false dichotomy trying to compare them. They're really apples and oranges.
Yeah, I completely agree, Edward, and Antonio, to ease your mind. The Portuguese coast is blessed with storage capacity, so you don't have to worry about CCS in your country. The other thing is that I mean, about this false dichotomy, the volumes of CO2 that we need to that we need to mitigate, or the volumes of CO2 emissions from industry that we need to mitigate are orders of magnitude larger than the amount that we could put into CO2 utilization products. Or so it's really not, the one is not an alternative for the other. CCS is needed especially for emissions abatement and making sure that these emissions don't get into the atmosphere. And then CCU is needed as another source of carbon, and ideally that carbon does not come from fossil fuels, but it comes from either biogenic sources or from the air, right? Because only then we can make close to net zero products, which is where we need to go.
Yep, thank you. Maybe I can ask if Tom, if you have anything to add to this discussion thread.
I think it's been pretty widely discussed. Yeah, I think I partly agree with what Ewout said, but I do have to respect that for certain countries, they may be a little bit further down the sort of development ladder for CO2 storage. They may have theoretical potential, but we do know it takes a long time to actually turn that theoretical potential into something that's ready for a permit. And I think crucial there is really trying to enable these knowledge sharing platforms to try and cut corners and get experts that have already dealt with the storage permits and the technicalities around there, get them to exchange knowledge, able to maybe countries that are more early on the development sort of phase to able to cut corners and really have really detailed technical work sessions around what, for example, is necessary for monitoring strategy for storage site. What are sort of like the key parameters that regulators need to bear in mind when they're assessing the suitability of sites and assessing that a site is actually operating within the agreed spec. So there's lots of activities we can actually do to accelerate this deployment, but we need the time and we need the funding and really need to be able to get the experts, which is a very small pool of experts right now. We need to access them and be able to sort of tease out this information. And I think that's a key way to advance, in some of these regions that are, haven't got there yet on the storage side.
During the ConsenCUS project, one of these experts, the BGS organization, the British Geological Survey, together with the Danish site operator in Stenlille, they developed such a matrix. Okay, if we want to do permanent storage or even intermittent storage and getting CO2 out to use it later on, if you have the desire, what are the risks? How can you mitigate it? And this is proven to be a nice report and deliverable in the ConsenCUS project. So thank you. I also have one other avenue I wanted to ask, because being a Dutch guy living in the northern part of the Netherlands, above this huge gas field we extracted a lot of carbon from, but then you have now a sort of community resistance against putting something back. So that's a no-go. So then we have a very technical, feasible storage site, but we can do something about it. Do you see this as a problem, or are there enough more safer offshore options?
Is that a question to me? So you mean actually injecting CO2 into the Groningen gas field?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I'm not going to go. I think the easy way out is to say that the Dutch government has, already for a long time ago had a memorandum a moratorium on actually onshore storage. So that's a no-go basically. So that's quite easy. You can go into I think the Groningen gas field is a hugely sensitive topic, and I think that's a long shot. But I think, is banning onshore storage in general in the Netherlands like a good idea? it's not been done for technical purposes. It's been done due to public perception, and that's in itself a valid reason. I'm not going to challenge that. But we do see other countries moving forward with onshore storage, like for example Denmark, where the feeling amongst the local public is different.
Yep.
You know, so I don't think that the experience of the Netherlands needs to mirror on all the rest of Europe. But I'm not going to comment specifically on the Groningen gas field.
I mean, I think the issue though with onshore storage and development in general is that so the actual act of injecting CO2 in the ground, we know like can be done safely, right? So it's not really an issue of safety. And I think with risk, it's always about how people feel about risks, right? And also a question of trade-offs in terms of what's in it for me, right? So in terms of the disturbances that CO2 storage can cause, we're talking about next to nothing in terms of land footprint. So it's basically a well that's in the middle of someone's field. There's no noise. It's a pipeline under the ground. So it's not like a wind turbine, which has generally, I mean, anyone been up to a close to a wind turbine? They are noisy, they're big. So CO2 has that as an advantage. The problem is that you can't see it, you can't smell it. And so you can feel about that, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And I think as well as the fact that we're not necessarily used to it in a lot of places in Europe. So we know that even from experiences, the places where people are used to mining or gas production, to underground activities, let's say, they're more likely to be okay with it. But at least we know, and having discussed with stakeholders in Denmark, the questions that tend to come up from local stakeholders and necessarily the reasons why they might not be so happy might surprise you. In many cases, it's questions about their home value, how many trucks are going to be driving on the roads, if there will be noise from the seismic testing or monitoring, for example. These are the type of questions that are coming up in places where onshore storage is being tried out. But I think the most important thing that I wanted to illustrate is that we need to see CO2 storage and its development very much as a public resource, or as a resource that can benefit us all as a public. I think the Danish approach of the government taking an ownership role, and that means also providing funding for these resources, is also helpful for the private sector to de-risk these assets, but also by developing a resource that's going to benefit our environment as a whole. And then also in particular benefiting those landowners that will have to put up with some disturbance, or at least a little bit. It's really important that they have an ability to partake and benefit from these projects financially. And so I think that we'll hopefully see some really useful experiences in Denmark over the coming years that should really be emulated in other member states.
Thank you, Edward. I would like to drop in one last question, and that is, Meinert, you already mentioned the funnel of innovation that is ongoing, and you mentioned that maybe we should also invest more in demonstration phase. And we have now the new multi-annual financial framework coming up. So what would you wish for in this regard?
I mean, it's the answer is as easy as it is difficult, right? So if we want serious industrial carbon management, or carbon management in general in the European Union, to the extent needed to reach our climate targets and 2050 net zero, we'll need to scale up CCUS and other forms of decarbonization much more than we are now. So just speaking on behalf of CCS or CCUS, my wish list would be quite a lot of money being channeled towards developing real projects, right? And we've seen from the projects that are being developed what kind of money we're talking about. So the amount of money that the Norwegian government is contributing, the Dutch government, and the UK government. And I said it before. I mentioned before that the reason why we need to do this now is to make CCUS cheaper later, right? And I think affordable to a level that people are willing to pay for it, and affordable to a level that can actually be covered by emission trading credits. So it's that I think that's the thing that is most important. And then in the slipstream of that, we also need more money, but that will be smaller amounts, but need to be channeled towards R&D, towards demonstration, exactly to get that next generation of CO2 capture, CO2 utilization, so conversion technologies, carbon dioxide removal technologies, to a level where we can actually start to see their performance in the field when applied to real flue gases at a significant scale, or applied to real air or other things where you want to capture the CO2 from. As an example, we were funded under Horizon 2020, right, Dirk? I did this project, and there were was the kind of in these years, it was one of the few or the only European call where for piloting and demonstration industrial CCS, and 2 projects were funded. But if to reach our targets, it should have been 10. And earlier this year, there was the direct air capture and the bioenergy CCS piloting call, and I think eventually 3 projects were funded, but it should have probably been 10 to 20. To live up to our targets, right? And I think that's where things are going wrong a little bit. So, I mean, obviously, this is all a political decision, and you can only spend money once. But I think the amount of call it subsidies or funding for not for developing technologies, but for scaling technologies and deploying technologies, so that we can start driving the costs down, that is by far not where it is, and that's what I would like to see from the new policies that are coming on stream now.
Yes, thank you, Meinert, for your take on this. Are there reactions? Do you see something moving there, Edward, in the discussions with EU policymakers?
I mean, I think the clear thing that comes out now is that Europe has been really great at funding research and innovation and pretty terrible at commercialization. And that because both of those have not been linked for some reason. I would love to know why it took so long for EU policymakers to realize that the US was great for commercializing, or at least the US also has been great for research and demonstration. And one of the things I think the US has done really, really well is been actually making the results of those research and demonstration programs publicly available. So the feed studies that come out of these projects, they will pay 50%, let's say, to build a first of a kind but full size demo plant that does carbon capture and storage on a coal-fired power plant. Or originally it was also going to be on the industrial sector, and then Trump came and completely torpedoed it earlier this year. Maybe the Democrats will try again in a couple of years. But all of those results come out in publicly available feed studies. In Europe, that's not the case. I would love to know why. And I think that's something that we hope to certainly work on in terms of the revision of the Innovation Fund coming up next year. And that's very much targeted towards demonstration scale projects. Because if the government is going to pay for a large part of a demo project to be built, then the people should be able to benefit from the results that come from that. I think the next thing as well is to not necessarily pick winners, but pick technologies and fund technologies that have a pathway to a business case in the future. If you're trying to, develop a technology that develops some sort of really bespoke e-fuel that can only be used in cars, that's great. But, the reality is more often than not, all the cars in the future are going to be battery electric vehicles. So, sorry, but great idea in a lab, but I don't think we should be pouring millions and billions of European taxpayers' money into technologies that have no real pathway in terms of a market share in the future. And I think that also plays in with CCS as well. I don't think we need CCS for everything. I think there's a lot of sectors that are sort of clearly, okay, here's where we're going to need it: cement, lime, waste to energy, where there's a real lack of alternatives. Then there's the sort of makes sense in the right conditions, and there's very much a debate. I think steel, chemicals, other sectors as well, like fertilizers, for example. You can make green ammonia if you've got abundant renewable or cheap electricity. Again, Europe doesn't have a lot of that. So there's a question of time, and there's a debate of if and where and what particular site and facility. And actually, I think maybe this is a good plug for me, Nia, and Tom, who've been working on or Bologna and EPG, who've been working on the CCS ladder, is potentially a useful resource, I think, for identifying what sectors it would make most sense to really also assign a large part of government funding towards. But yeah, I fully agree with Maynard's comments on needing to really identify where and put more money on the table, basically, for commercializing these technologies.
You mentioned this CCUS use letter or the adoption letter. Is this something public already, or?
Very much so. Maybe Mihine, you want to speak a bit more about it?
Yeah, that's nice. I want to go to a sort of closing of this event, this webinar. I think we touched on a lot of subjects around CCUS and could talk for many hours more, but also time is limited. So if there is a question that is burning on your lips, you can put it in the chat. Maybe we can do one or two, but otherwise I will close out with thanking all of our panelists, mentioning that in October, Monday 13th, there is an event in Brussels, joint forces of CEP and CCSA and now I forgot the third organization organizing also
CCS Europe.
CCS Europe, sorry, yes. So any last remarks from the panelists? Otherwise, I think, yeah, once again, great discussing with you, great having you on our panel, and thank you for your efforts and your time at this point in time in the evening, and then I will close this webinar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Edward. Thank you, Meine. Thank you, René, for the time spent, and hopefully see you around in Brussels or otherwise somewhere else.
Happily.
Cheers.
Thank you. Have a great evening.